Hello and welcome to a special episode of the Sibylline Podcast, where we will be speaking about the experiences of women in international security in honor of International Women's Day on the 8th of March. So obviously this is a Women's Day podcast, so we're going to dive into predominantly female-related issues in the workplace and industry. We talk about a lot of our own lived experiences and kind of traditional issues and kind of gender norms that we experience as women in the industry. But I think, first of all, it's really important to acknowledge that there are gender equality and diversity issues beyond the kind of binary norms, gender norms that we that we will talk about. There needs to be a lot more done across the industry, our one specifically, but also in kind of wider workplaces to support members of kind of the LGBTQ plus community. So over to you guys. Obviously, I've said my views on that, but is there anything that you would kind of like to add before we go into the crux of the podcast?
Yeah, I would just comment that to emphasize that this is, diversity in international security is something that we're only, beginning to talk about and have this conversation. It's one that I think we should continue to have and will not, just be settled here. And there's a whole lot of things that can and should be done on diversity.
Absolutely. Yeah. Edie, same kind of remarks or?
Yeah, absolutely. Just to agree with what's already been said, it's a really important conversation and it's good we're having it now, but there's a lot more to do still.
Yeah, and I guess talking about kind of other types of diversity and...
Yeah, I think like interpreting the terms intersectionality and diversity slightly wider, particularly in the context of London, because we are working in a city that's incredibly international and diverse. I think it's also important to acknowledge that women of color and from other countries who work in London probably have different experiences as well. And so, I think it's important to be more holistic in our understanding of the term women and experience. So... Yeah.
Okay, so I do have a couple of questions in front of me. I imagine we're probably going to get off script and get into kind of nitty-gritty questions anyway. But maybe Edie, to kick us off, to start with, was there any, hesitations or any reluctance for you as a woman getting into this industry? Did you kind of have any premeditated obstacles in your head before applying?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very male-dominated industry. So I think where there's perhaps less women in higher up positions as well, in leadership positions, when there's less female mentorships. I don't know about you guys, but I found that definitely something I thought about before applying. And I think it's an obstacle in working in this industry as well.
Yeah, definitely. How about you? Feelings, Priya?
I guess... slightly different. I didn't actually do a lot of, maybe it's a bad thing, but I didn't actually do a lot of investigation research into like the composition of the industry, but I did feel the dominance or rather the predominance of males once I actually entered the industry on the job, when I realized that there is a bit of a ratio issue, particularly in terms of people in higher levels of management. So I guess getting into the job, I didn't really see it as an issue, but I guess being on the job, I recognize it now.
Yeah, definitely. So it wasn't kind of before applying that you had these or kind of issues. It was, once you're there and navigating these kind of in the industry once you're in already.
Yeah, exactly.
Sydney, is it the same?
Yeah.
Did you kind of feel the same as well?
Yeah, I would say that entering, I thought that it would be much like, the London consulting industry as a whole, and probably similar like composition there. But indeed, then I realized that because a lot of our colleagues or people in the industry are coming from roles in government, military, or even intelligence backgrounds, where that traditionally and historically has been a more male field. So I think that really, you understand that once you're in this space, and probably underscores how much more we would also benefit as an industry if there's greater female representation also in those government roles.
That's what I was literally just about to say. Yeah. So we're even picking onto another topic here of like the traditional routes. There needs to be more women coming kind of through those public sector and traditional male roles anyway. I think I'd say the same. I think it's been very much kind of once you're in the industry navigating that I'm going to be honest, I didn't even really know that this industry massively existed kind of as like a young graduate.
Absolutely.
So I guess my premeditated views of it weren't too kind of worldly before coming in. But I'd agree with you all. It's definitely something to kind of look at once you have that role and once you're kind of in.
I think it made an impression on me also in my kind of first client calls and briefings where you are suddenly very aware that you are
so true.
The only female on the call.
Whereas also, a woman maybe coming from a more young professional background or say mid-career, and a lot of people who might have been in their roles for decades or have really been in the field for a very long time, and you become suddenly very aware when you're if it's a digital call too, like if you're on the Zoom screen and
yes,
you just see yourself.
Absolutely. Okay, so onto that, I guess we've already touched upon there potentially being some ratio issues in the industry. I think we can all agree with that, and we have all agreed with that. So I guess what is the importance of having that senior leadership and that female leadership in these senior roles? And ultimately, what is the role of that female mentor, and kind of how can we all benefit from that going forward? Super.
I guess it is really important because those are the roles we aspire to one day be in. And I think it's important for us to be able to see someone who looks like us in some way, so that it just makes that process a lot easier. If there's no one there, then I guess that aspiration, there's a dent on that aspiration. And of course, if there's someone who's been through that journey, the idea of having mentorship from someone like that would be such a reassuring feeling to have. I guess it's also just because women have different experiences and responsibilities from men, say, for example, in the workplace. So someone who's been able to get that kind of balance in their life, information like that also really helps you in terms of being able to structure your own life and seeing how other people have done it. Especially if you're someone, for example, who's coming and working from abroad, to see how that happens. I think to see that as a success story, as someone who's achieved everything you always wanted, I'm sure is at least for me, is a super reassuring thing to know.
It's almost like it's possible. I can do it. I can see you've done it.
Exactly.
Etc. Has there been any kind of experiences for you guys? I think we're relatively new in our career. I think all of us can agree with that. A couple of years in, I definitely feel as though I've already had experiences, good and bad, positive and negative, with kind of female senior leadership. So on from that question, are there any kind of experiences that you guys can present to us or inform the question?
Going back to when I was a student in my undergraduate degree, I had a sort of negative early experience in this sector when I was trying to seek out female mentorship, not even mentorship in a sort of formal sense, but trying to meet women who are like seasoned professionals in this sector, which is an exceedingly narrow, subsection. And I went to an event that was being held in Brussels when I was studying there, and it was an association for female professionals in the security space. And I approached a senior woman in the organization after the event and tried to get chatting to her and express my interest in getting involved and any opportunities that there might be, whatever that might look like. And she effectively kind of shut me down and told me that this wasn't a place for students really, and that this was, for professionals. And that was it was humiliating in the moment and then frustrating because I was just shut down. And it would have been extremely helpful for her to have been rather receptive and really, I'm sure she's a very busy woman and has a lot of things to worry about, but I think it's very important to be receptive and encouraging when you might receive, another, young woman who's keen to ask questions and is passionate and interested and wants to get involved, and to meet her where she is and give her the opportunity.
And I guess having that experience as well could potentially, it even shows even more and highlights how important it is to have that kind of female mentorship and leadership, how you were feeling in that moment, such kind of, as you say, awful words to use, but humiliation and potentially kind of not feeling very motivated, demotivated, etc. Those are the sort of things that we should actually, be getting from our mentorship, whether it's female or not, but particularly from females, etc. So, experiences like that kind of maybe highlight and underscore how important it is maybe to have that female mentorship. Edie, do you kind of have any points on that?
Yeah, I actually have had a different experience, one like that as well, but I'm thinking of something kind of more positive, where I've worked with senior women, and they've been incredibly positive and encouraging, and like we were saying earlier, just kind of seeing a success story in a way, and seeing someone who's kind of embodied all these things that you think you should work towards, showing that it's possible as well, and having those conversations. And I think, that's really important. So that's it. A more positive experience.
Definitely.
I have a question for you then, Edie. How did you get involved, or what did that connection look like? How did you make that connection with these women? Was it through work, or was it through some other kind of external organization?
No, it was through work through here, actually. I think we have a couple of women really kind of in seniorship positions who are really great here, and who are really willing to always have a conversation with you. And I think just having conversation with women in general can be very different to men in terms of kind of the things that you are willing to talk about and the experiences that they've had.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I think like coming from someone who is in more of a seniorship position as well, I think that makes a difference.
Yeah, definitely. So using those avenues that you have at work, and ultimately they have to be there, don't they, to kind of benefit from them. So that even emphasizes our point again on the importance in the industry that you're in, company, etc., of having those. Because you've just said the benefits of it are endless.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so equally kind of similar sort of question, I guess, is how can women support each other? So we've just mentioned the importance of having that senior leadership. So, for this question, we're not just talking about senior ourselves, us sat here, etc. How can women support each other in this industry specifically, and kind of wider as well in work generally? And again, how important is this? What are the benefits of this? And alternatively, if we don't have that support system, what are kind of the downfalls and issues? Sydney, to kick us off.
I think off the top of the head, one of the biggest issues that will arise if those sorts of things are not prioritized or in place is retention. I mean, being able to hold on to and foster and outstanding young female potential. I think if women don't necessarily see themselves or see people who look like them in senior roles, you don't necessarily see yourself being able to have a future in an organization. And I think young ambitious women will maybe move on, or they'll want to go someplace where they see a viable future, where they will be able to progress and achieve things,
especially if you see those leadership roles elsewhere, and you see that it is possible, etc. So I completely agree. I think one thing that I've noticed, working alongside women, etc., especially after the pandemic, because obviously we were all working quite remotely, I think having that in-person communication and office environment with a load of women is really, really important. And the communication avenues and the kind of networks that you build to talk about topics that are potentially quite sensitive and topics that traditionally women don't gravitate towards and don't feel confident. And I think one of the things that we can all understand and realize that we find quite uncomfortable, even me trying to talk and get it out now, I'm like blah, but is salary, and how female and male employers and employees approach salary. So working alongside women for the past 2 years, and having that support now, where you're saying how important is it? It's, pushing each other and building the confidence to have those conversations, not only with senior female leadership about salary, but also kind of male senior leadership as well. And I think they are traditionally conversations that females and women don't necessarily have the same confidence as having as potentially male colleagues. That's from my experience. So I'd be interested to hear if you kind of think the same, but off the top of my head, working alongside in person has given me that confidence to push me towards having those uncomfortable conversations.
Yeah, I definitely think we have a space, at least at Sibylline, where we do feel comfortable and confident to have those conversations. But I think on your original question on how we can help other women, I think something that I do, definitely is when someone approaches me on LinkedIn, and if it's a female, I definitely try to go the extra mile. I offer, and I don't think it takes a lot of time, but even if it's something as basic as just reading someone's cover letter or reviewing a CV, I definitely try and do like an in-person feedback session. I would go the extra mile for someone who's interested, who's a female and who wants to join the industry. And maybe even in those conversations, have these more difficult conversations where I kind of say that there may be a red flag, there's a ratio issue, everything we spoke about basically. So just that I didn't have that sense of clarity coming in. So I hope to be able to change that for someone else who's trying to come in. But I think, just like, because obviously none of us at this point are in leadership positions. So from the positions that we are, I think not yet.
Watch out.
But from the positions that we are, to really just try and help in any way.
Definitely.
I think would be useful.
No, I completely agree with what's been said already. I think having that avenue of communication, like you were saying, is so important. Having those open conversations can be so helpful. So
I find in a professional setting as well as in a personal setting, having these conversations with your friends is also very important. I have one of my very close friends was, my kind of champion and cheerleader throughout my kind of process when I was looking to move to a new organization, and a very, very forcefully encouraged me to negotiate and to...
negotiation's a big one.
And that is something that can be very daunting and very uncomfortable for everybody, especially if you've never done it before. And it's super nerve-wracking, but also it's very important to do, even if you're not necessarily successful in that instance. Being the type of person that does negotiate, I think on average, that a woman during her lifetime that does negotiate in terms of salaries and pay packages and everything will net on average, I think, like $1 million more in her lifetime or so.
Absolutely.
Need to fact check the exact figure, but something along those lines.
That sounds good to me.
This information, but it was some figure like that. So it's really quite astounding. Just being, making a habit of doing those things that can be uncomfortable will really serve you throughout your lifetime, and you gain practice and encouraging others to do so, and helping them like through it, I think is also really
well, there's those statistics, talking about statistics as well, but there's those there's the idea ultimately that women will, on a list of requirements for a job, will see one thing that they're potentially not quite qualified for, and they will be like, well, I can't apply for that. Whereas there's studies been done where it kind of flips over and it turns to a male candidate and they will apply anyway, and it's kind of having that confidence to not undersell yourself, and as you said, having that friend to be to be your support network and just say apply anyway, what's the worst that can happen, etc., and not underselling yourself as a female candidate, which I think studies have shown we do that. Great answers. When you talk about women, like female issues and security, this is a really interesting topic to go down, particularly for what we do on a day-to-day basis. We have to navigate some quite tricky topics. I know, Sydney, you've obviously just, we're putting out a piece on abortion this week and kind of female rights in that sense. So when we talk about women's issues and security, I think around this table we cover we cover the world. Right? Yeah, we do actually. We do actually cover the world. How do we approach this? Are there any kind of best practices? Have there been any advice that you can give to kind of females going through same sort of issues or dilemmas in the industry? Supriya, how do you kind of approach this on a day-to-day basis?
I think the first thing to do is not homogenize the experience of women and acknowledge that women in different geographies, even within a region. So, for example, I'm a South Asia analyst, and there are different countries that I look at, and to make sure that I acknowledge that each lived experience is different according to the geography of which that person belongs to. I think that's really important, to not say that someone, for example, in Pakistan, a woman in Pakistan has the same amount of problems or lived experience as, say, someone in Nepal. That's the first thing to do. And to acknowledge that maybe because of my own positionality, I may not entirely be able to relate to that experience when I talk about that person. So to have that sense of self-awareness, I think, is the first most important step. Yeah, and I guess, do you guys also feel that way when you talk about women in your own regions?
Yeah, I mean, Edie, Sub-Saharan Africa,
Yeah, Sub-Saharan Africa, I mean, women are going to have such a different experience as I have, and it's just so important to do that extra research and to really not apply the values and the expectations that we have or that I have onto those women, and really try and understand their experience. And I think just paying that extra attention is so important.
Yeah. Sydney, same.
Yeah, I suppose to a certain extent, my experience is a bit different because I'm covering North America, and often that is the US.
Yeah.
I'm from the US.
Yeah.
So I have felt at times a very, very personal tie to the topics that I'm covering. And that can sometimes be very difficult, difficult topics to address. And, when it is a potential kind of what feels like a political, social, moral crisis in my own country, and I'm writing about it, it does feel very personal. And sometimes it can also definitely get in my head, and it's something that I can't necessarily leave at the door either when I leave work.
Yeah, it's difficult to write with impartiality sometimes when it is actually an experience you feel as though you're going through as well. Yeah, definitely.
It's the the infinite challenge of an analyst to always pursue impartiality, and to make sure that all of our analysis is done in the most rigorous way that we possibly can. But it's also, I think the first step is also acknowledging that you do have opinions and viewpoints.
Yeah, absolutely.
And those are a part of you, but trying to a degree separate that from your ability to be an analyst and go through the analytical the framework and the steps that you need to do in order to write.
Great answers, guys. So the next topic that I want to talk about is so obviously during lockdown and after lockdown, we've seen a lot of companies look inwards on their internal health policies, just kind of how they're supporting employees, etc., with kind of health concerns. So obviously not focusing on that necessarily strictly, but how has being bottom line, how has being a female affected your everyday work? Examples or just kind of things we can talk about. I think it's quite a widespread question, but how has being a female affected, if it has, your everyday kind of work life?
I think for me, an obvious one would be to talk about menstruation. And this is something that a lot of women maybe don't necessarily talk about. But I do think it has a significant impact on my literal ability to work.
Yeah.
Because it manifests in different ways. Some women get cramps, some women get mood swings, some people get nothing at all, some people have back pain, etc. And that has like a physiological effect on you and your ability to work. And there have been days where I might have been like, okay, I may not be able to perform my 100% because of something that is something that's completely out of my control, just simply because I am a woman. But I kind of have to power through anyway. And I guess in some forms, maybe women who only are in an all-man team or have line managers who are male may feel they can't really express that sentiment to their line managers. So that could also be a hurdle. So yeah, that would be something that I've experienced, and I'm sure you guys also have examples.
Yeah, definitely. Also, in terms of the UK, we have the NHS, which is an incredible public institution, but also can be difficult sometimes to get the healthcare that you need in a timely fashion. Like I have had that issue before, and it also can cause a tremendous amount of stress and anxiety as well while you're trying to wait to see somebody who is specialized and qualified in the type of healthcare that you need.
100%. Yeah.
And that can really have that kind of back of the mind haunting, kind of grating at you, and can also distract you from your ability to do your job.
Yeah. And as you said, there are situations, I don't think we've normalized the conversation enough yet to have, for everyone to feel comfortable to go to their employer and say, bottom line, this is what's happening, especially if you have an all-male team. I've definitely experienced that before. And it is the mindset of, well, this happens to a very large percentage of women around the world, so get on with it kind of thing. And people experience, have such different experiences with that as well. So yeah, I 100% can relate. And Edie, let's talk about maternity leave. I know it's something we've had many discussions about kind of on several occasions, but kind of what's your thoughts on this? Obviously, this is a really kind of hot topic at the moment.
Yeah, I think it's such a hurdle for women.
Yeah.
Even when you're young, kind of coming into the industry, trying to navigate that. And I think it comes back to women in seniorship positions as well, and having those kind of women role models who maybe not even have necessarily gone through that, but someone who perhaps understands a bit more, and seeing what channels are available and having more open conversations, I think is so important. Yeah, I don't know.
I guess if I could add to that, I feel like there are still a lot of women who feel, particularly in consultancy, that if they're out of action for a long time, that could affect their career progression. So some of them have even I do know of someone who was like, maybe this is not the right time to get pregnant and start a family and settle down because I'm at that stage in my career. And the fact that women even have to consider that still today is in itself something to think about.
They don't have that reassurance.
They can be out of action, which is a horrible thing to say, but be out of action for a bit and still come back and expect the same kind of career path that they saw for themselves. Or even not even of course pregnant, but even just settling down, for example. It could be a decision a woman has to take in terms of potentially compromising between her personal and professional life. Not to say that males don't have to make decisions like this, but I do feel like female do feel like there's a burden on them to even settle down that I think sometimes male don't feel. So it is a bit of a complex situation to navigate still for many women.
That dovetails into also the issue of childcare
Yeah.
on a societal level. I know from being American and covering North America, it is a massive, massive issue. We have a massive shortage of like childcare that is accessible, that people are qualified to do it, and that people can even begin to afford. And this is a massive calculation. And also, in general, or traditionally, women are the primary caregiver. So even if they are professional, they might be responsible for ensuring that their child is looked after even while they're at work. I know that. Not to bring it back to work content, but the U.S. CHIPS Act that was just passed to enhance U.S. semiconductor production just stipulated that any private companies receiving funds will have to ensure that their employees and their workers have affordable childcare.
Wow.
Which I thought was really interesting and a kind of good example of maybe a top-down government-led approach to actually also trying to increase access and maybe change norms as well and expectations about what are the obligations of a firm and like that we have an actual crisis and that also organizations will lose out on productivity potentially
100%.
If their employees don't have access to childcare and
exactly. I think there's so many occasions where women have either tried to come back prematurely from maternity care or maternity leave, because of the examples we've given, where feeling like you're behind and you're going to be left behind, etc. if you don't put in that kind of extra work that that women are feeling like they have to. So and as you said, productivity levels will start to suffer, and your work-life balance will take an absolute hammering. Even when you've been given that time, it's the normalization of taking that maternity leave and not having to do any work to make sure that you're going to come back in a stronger place almost, or in the same place that you left when you went on maternity leave. So definitely a very interesting topic, and one that I'm sure we could sit here for about an hour to discuss all in total. But final question, what can men do to support women in the industry? That's, a huge question, but I think one that warrants being the final question.
I think the first thing, which is something we kind of covered on, but is to be able to produce an environment where women feel like they can have conversations with men about issues that they face, I think is the first thing. And to acknowledge there are still people who don't think that there's an issue at all. And let's be frank about that. There are men who still feel like women have certain caregiver roles and that's where they belong. And those conversations we think don't exist in the West as well, but they very well do. So I think the first thing is to acknowledge that there is an issue and to create spaces in it, particularly it could be in terms of even organizing a workshop, or it could even be at like a one-to-one with a male manager, but just to make sure that to have a different approach to a female employee in a way, to make sure that they're doing okay. And to support them, even if it's just being able to be a listener, because maybe many of them can't relate to a female experience, which is fair. I think it's just to be able to for a woman to feel confident that she has someone to hear her.
Yeah.
Specifically a male, I think would be even better. It would be even more reassuring.
It's kind of having that self-awareness that we were talking about, you know, and
Yeah.
being aware of all the topics that we've just spoken about, you know, all of this information and kind of, the potentially, ultimately we're here for equality, right? This is kind of, you know, as a female, that's what we want in the industry, and not just our industry, but kind of workplace in total, is the equality side of it. So, you know, everything we've just kind of spoken about, and I guess it's for our male colleagues to kind of have that self-awareness
Sensibility,
that we have a long way to go, and that there are those gaps, etc. Sydney, Edie, anything else to kind of add from your side?
I think it comes down to the same kind of thing: openness, conversations. And I don't know about you, but I've sometimes been in calls where it's all men, and you kind of sometimes need that extra push from someone, or like just that person who's encouraging to, or that you feel heard by, to kind of actually go in and say what you want to say.
Yeah.
So I think, that's so important. Having those kind of conversations and openness is so important.
Yeah. I think on a practical level, I mean, it can be very daunting or seem like an impossible task. Like, we have 1,000 things that we have to fix. But the first and very practical, you know, thing that I think a male colleague can and should do is just simply ask themselves, like, what can I do to try to support my female colleagues, whether they're junior or, you know, at the same level or even senior. Just ask yourself, like what can I do? And be willing to also hear what the response to that question is.
Yeah, definitely. So what I'm gathering is awareness. That's like the main thing going forward. Thank you everyone for joining. And I think we could probably sit here for another 2 hours, potentially longer, definitely longer. Yeah, 2 years. Lots to dive into. But
Recurring podcast every year.
Yeah, thank you so much everyone for answering questions, and
And thank you all for listening and tuning in as well.
Happy Women's Day.
Happy Women's Day.